Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me check my volume. I've dropped my ink pen, so it's on the other side of the desk. So I'm ink penless today. Alright, good. Sounds good. I don't know how many people remember Pat Buchanan. He's kind of within my memory space. I mean, I remember snapshots of the Reagan era, if that makes sense. And so I partially remember him. I remember him running for office. I remember him as being a hard right-winger, like a hard right-winger. Today, the political establishment has moved so far to the right that Pat Buchanan, like what he's saying is, let me say it this way. He's on RT. That's the first mind-blowing point. And the second is what he's saying, I completely agree with. Not just agree with, just true. I would even go so far as to even make the claim flat fact true. I don't use flat fact much. I use it. I say it a lot, but I say it or only try to reserve it for things that are nailed down truth. This is true. There's no daylight in this. He gives this awesome explanation of military policy, and it goes so far as to say, make this point that this imperialism stuff needs to come to an end. We need to unravel these bases or this world police force. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, this is Pat Buchanan. I remember this guy. We moved so far to the right with regards to policy that Pat Buchanan is a voice of truth. Jesus Christ. But what he's saying here is right. What he's saying is completely accurate. And as you hear him say it, it jars me because it's coming out of the mouth of Pat Buchanan. It doesn't make it any less untrue. Let's take a look at this. This is Pat Buchanan on RT. The reason why I say it's shocking, look, I know Reagan had this special relationship with Gorbachev when they were in office. And this thing of bringing down hostilities and everything else. And so I guess maybe from the standpoint of the Reagan era, maybe there's this kind of peacenik thing. I just remember right-wingers being this kind of just hawkish towards Russia and militaristic towards them in many respects. That's why I'm saying shocking to me. That could purely just be my memory of Republicans, not necessarily the Republicans from the standpoint of Reagan and Buchanan. But let's take a look. Good interview. I like to watch these with my audience. I saw the first few parts of it, and I was like, yes, this is going to be an awesome clip. Let me play it for my audience. So we're going to watch part of this together, the first part I've seen.
I'm sitting down with Patrick Buchanan, senior advisor to Presidents Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Ronald Reagan. He ran for the presidency 3 times. He wrote many books, and some of his books have really menacing titles. His latest book is called Suicide of a Superpower. Will America Survive to 2025? Very pessimistic, sir. Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
With regards to foreign policy, you're saying one of the ways to prevent that suicide from happening is to dismantle the empire. First of all, what do you mean by empire?
Or you might call it the American Imperium or the American Empire. The United States has military bases dating back to the Cold War in Europe, in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, all over the world. And we're running a deficit of 10% of our gross national product. And quite frankly, we can't afford any longer, in my judgment, to continue to carry this enormous burden of defending 40 or 50 countries around the world. And so I think we're going to have to dismantle these bases. We're going to have to come back from Asia, come back from the Middle East and South Asia. And I think we're going to have to bring the troops home from Europe.
You were writing and speaking out extensively about the Bush era crusade under the banner of ending tyranny in the world.
Just to put a little context into what he's saying, we have bases on like 70% of the planet. Like it's mind-blowing, the number of countries that we're in, we have no other military bases in America. But yes, 70% of the planet, and yeah, going all the way back to World War II. Let's let him keep going. I don't want to interrupt this too much.
World. Do you think that crusade is still on?
Look, The idea that we're going to end tyranny in the world is utterly utopian. We never are. We've had tyrants from time immemorial. And what the United States should do, in my judgment, in its foreign policies, is build a defense establishment strong enough to protect our vital interest and our vital allies. And when problems arise, whether it's in Zimbabwe or somewhere else, the people there have got to deal with their own problems. There's no doubt about it that throughout history, tyrants have arisen and seized power in one place or another, and as long as they don't threaten our vital interest or threaten and kill our people, the fact that they rule and or misrule certain countries is none of our business.
Osama bin Laden.
Practical. Makes perfect sense. And yet, that is not a perspective that you would ever get on CNN and probably not even MSNBC or Fox News. He used to be hard right, meaning he used to be on those channels. You would never get him on those channels anymore. What he's saying makes perfect sense. Look, man, the question will be, what is that amount? Meaning, what is that militaristic amount that you need in order to protect yourself? How muscular do you need to be to protect your interests? So fair enough. We can fight on that front. But at the very least, getting out of this thing of policemen of the world. Let people deal with their own affairs. We don't necessarily have to be involved. And I fucking love it. Let's keep going. I think he's right.
Laden's successor said he supports the war against Assad in Syria. And Al-Qaeda was reportedly behind the 4 suicide bombings, which killed scores of Syrian officials and soldiers in Damascus and Aleppo. Doesn't it seem strange that the U.S. is on the same side with Al-Qaeda in Syria?
Well, it does indeed. Listen, the Assad government has been ruthless and brutal in suppressing the uprising and the insurgency against it. Not as brutal as his father was, Hafiz al-Assad, who slaughtered 20,000 people in Hama in 1982 when they rose up. And it would probably be a good thing if he departed and they had a more democratic government. But your point is well taken. The United States should ask itself not only what is the character of this regime, but first question should be, do we have a vital interest in who rules Syria? My answer to that is no. Secondly, if the incumbent government is overthrown, who comes to power in Syria? You have the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to overthrow Assad. You have Al-Qaeda, apparently, which is moving in, trying to overthrow Assad. So we've got to ask ourselves, is the devil we know preferable to the devil we don't know? But in the Syrian situation, I think the very fact that Al-Qaeda has been involved, apparently, in these 4 suicide attacks should tell us that we ought to be wary about overthrowing or participating in a movement to overthrow Assad before we know what's going to replace him.
That's just good damn sense. That's just good damn sense. Now, here's the catch. I have a video coming up next with Noam Chomsky. And Chomsky makes the argument that that's intentional. That the goal of it is not to have these nations to be, strong and consistent. They want them to be at war with one another. They want them weak and they want them broken because of that way they can't necessarily pose a challenge to imperial interests. That's a fascinating perspective. Now, taking that perspective and listening to what Buchanan is saying, Buchanan is like, these people are just incompetent. And that ultimately it is gross. I'm glad he's bringing this up because I brought this up. I'm like, you're looking around at your friends. You've just told Britain to go fuck itself. You just told Europe to go fuck itself. That's what you've told them. And you look around at your friends and your allies. And you have Saudi Arabia, who's literally murdering and starving Yemenis, weaponizing illness in order to take down one of the poorest countries in that region of the globe, if not on the planet. You have Israel, who's just been out there murdering Palestinians, shooting open guns into Palestinian territory. Palestinians, up tens of thousands of them. Snipers, shooting in the knees, in the head, and the groins. Killing press agents. I mean, people who are journalists, tattooed across their chests. I mean, this was horrific. Not to mention, even the ICC woke up and said, hey, it looks like they're committing a war crime, because they were committing a war crime. Those are your friends. And behind you, the people who you've been supporting in silence, the people who you've been giving money and resources and weapons, ISIS. ISIS and Al-Qaeda. You wanted to take down Assad so bad, you were willing to give these gross, horrific, repugnant human beings. And I understand they might have been contorted into what they are based on societal factors. Fair enough, I get it. But gross, horrific, repugnant human beings, those are the people you were giving those things to. You have no idea what's coming after Assad. No idea. Do you know that the Christians who are in those areas are looking to Assad for protection because at the very least he has somewhat of a secular government as opposed to what's coming behind it? You have no idea. And yet, that doesn't stop him one iota for pushing to get him out of that seat. It's fucking amazing. Pat Buchanan is right. The question becomes, are they doing this out of incompetence or are they doing this out of some kind of political strategy? Who knows? Let's let him keep going. But he's right. I agree.
As you said, it's very hard to tell what's going to happen to Syria if more radical forces seize power. Do you think the U.S. foreign policy might be helping terrorists indirectly?
I think the United States, American strategists would have to be fools not to see what Al-Qaeda is doing, not to ask the question, if it's good for Al-Qaeda, can it be good for us? And not to look at Assad and say, he may be a ruthless dictator in what he's doing, but what comes after him when he falls? I think Al-Qaeda does its best work, or it works best, when it finds a country that is fundamentally a failed state in Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan under the Taliban. And I think in those conditions, that's where Al-Qaeda can plan and recruit far better than it can when you have a regime which is a hardline regime running the situation, whether it's secular or whether it's
Syria
Muslim
torn apart by civil war. That seems like a good environment for them.
I think Syria is really a potential disaster in that we could have there a proxy war between the Sunni and Shia all over that region. They already have Sunni coming in from Iraq. They already have Al-Qaeda in there, apparently. You could have also a conflict, ethnic conflict, with the Druze in there and the Kurds in there, as well as Arabs in there. I think this is why I am against putting weapons in and aiding the anti-Assad resistance, because an all-out war there could be a disaster which leaves a failed state in Syria.
So what about the strategy that the U.S. is now pursuing, putting pressure on Assad alone and not addressing the armed groups, the fighting armed groups among the opposition as well?
Well, I think that's basically the United States has taken sides in this war. We've taken sides there just like we've taken sides in Libya.
What should or what should not the U.S. do here in Syria?
My policy would, if I were in the White House, would be by and large hands off Syria.
In one of your articles, you argue that the Obama administration doesn't want a war with Iran. The Pentagon, U.S. intelligence community, they're saying Iran does not have a nuclear bomb and hasn't decided whether or not to build a nuclear bomb. Iranians obviously gain nothing from a war. If nobody wants it, then why the drums of war? Why are they so loud?
There are people that want a war. I mean, do not think no one wants a war. You don't have wars unless someone wants it. And quite clearly, the Israeli government would like to see the United States smash Iran's nuclear program, which they think is creating the conditions where Iran could, with one leap forward, get a bomb. The Israeli lobby in the United States would like to see a war. They support the Israeli government. The neoconservatives do. Many Republicans do. There are many Americans who genuinely believe that if they believe Iran is moving toward a weapon, and if it is, they would favor military action to prevent it. There are a number of people that want a war.
But is there really a vital threat coming from Iran as you see it?
I don't know. I don't look. Iran is not Iran, I mean, during the Cold War, with due respect, Soviet Union had thousands of weapons. They could have destroyed us in an afternoon, and we could have done the same thing. I was around during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was genuinely terrifying.
Listen to what he's saying, because what he's saying is mind-blowing, and yet it's not. Like the nonsense that mainstream media is pushing with the stuff Donald Trump pulls out of the deal. It makes no sense in the world for him to pull out the deal, and yet the deal was put in place because of this idea of war and everything else with Iran, because of nuclear stuff. But he's making his point. He was like, I lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was fucking terrifying. We could have went to nuclear war at any moment. We're telling kids to get under their desks because those desks was going to somehow protect them from nuclear fallout. Do I think we're under threat? No. He laughs. He laughs. This is absurd. And he's saying, yeah, there are people pushing for war. Otherwise, you wouldn't get that war. And one of the first people he named was the Israeli government, which is always fucking hilarious. Or what governments he named. That hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is that the person who's in the White House now is amenable to that thinking. Not to mention Saudi Arabia is also on board for it. This is an amazing interview. From a foreign policy standpoint, at least in this very confines, what he's saying is right. What he's saying makes sense to me. Let's keep going.
But Iran doesn't frighten me, and I don't think it should frighten the American people. They don't have a bomb. They haven't made a decision to build one. They don't have the means to deliver one. And the Israelis have 300 atomic bombs. I mean, who presents the existential threat to whom? Well, I'll say who it was. I visited one of my doctors, and we were talking about, I hope we don't have a war in Iran, but now they're talking about intervention in Syria, and he said, thank God for the Russians. They've got some ships out there, and the Americans won't fool around with the Russian ships, so the Russians are keeping us out, and that's wonderful.
That was your doctor?
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Do you know how sad that is? Like, that's where we are. That's where we are. That's literally where we are. Where it's like some other country is going to somehow police our country because our country is run by fucking maniacs. This doctor saying, well, those Russians are going to keep us out. It's not their job to keep us out. Like, it's not their job. Like, the fact that they're doing that is, that in and of itself, this idea of the potential for something larger conflict being the thing that keeps us out, that is our responsibility. That's not theirs. And for whatever reason, getting across to the American public that this is a maniac way to be, this is fucking insane. Close. Our level of aggression in these countries and our association with Israel, with its level of aggression in those countries. And not to mention, he made this great point of, they have 300 nuclear missiles. Who's an existential threat to who? Who's an existential threat to who? But our media takes a particular disposition that because Israel is our ally, whatever they says, for the most part, gets a certain amount of carte blanche. Whereas the other groups, not so much. And if you don't believe me, look at this last story about the rockets. Iran fires 20 rockets. How do we know? They don't know. They took all of the word of the Israeli military. That's all it took. The same military that shot or killed, murdered 30 protesters with sniper rifles, shooting into crowds, shooting hundreds, like 700 people were injured with them shooting with live ammunition into a crowd. Those good, upstanding people are the people who are essentially telling you what took place, and the media says, well, I mean, we don't think they're lie about stuff. We don't think they're lie. They're killers, but they're not liars. Let's let them finish. It's almost done.
One of my doctors.
Do you think that's what the American public thinks?
I don't think any American wants to intervene in Syria. They don't understand anything about it. Iran, though, they got the Ayatollah and they got Ahmadinejad, and he will always help out the hawks with some insane statement every couple of months. He's going to destroy somebody or other, and then the Americans say we have to get him.
What is the danger of such rhetoric?
The danger of such rhetoric is that it leads to another war in the Middle East, which I think would be a disaster for my country. And I think it would be a disaster for the world economy. And I think it'd be a disaster for the world. I opposed Desert Storm back in 1991. I opposed even going in and cleaning Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait because I said, this will only be the first Arab-American war. And I was right. I mean, if you talk about Islamic wars, you had the war at Desert Storm, you had the war against Afghanistan, you got the war on Iraq, you had the war in Libya, now they're talking about Syria, now they're talking about Iran. Of what benefit has this been to the United States when you see where we were in 1990 and where we are today, and where China was in 1990 and where China is today? They haven't gone into any of these countries, haven't invaded anybody. And they're moving upward, as is Brazil and as are India. And what are we doing in all these places? I don't think you can't replicate the Middle West in the Middle East.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I gotta be honest. I am shocked as shit to say this. From a foreign policy perspective, I actually agree with Pat Buchanan. I mean, maybe this is this Rand Paul libertarian, American libertarian, thinking of stay out of it. Call it the prime directive of don't intervene because it doesn't necessarily help. Whatever you want to call it. I agree with him. Stay out. Stay out. They're always going to be bad guys. Stay out. Now, here's the catch. And there's a catch. There's always a catch. Assume for the moment you're playing a game of civilization. And as we play this game of civilization, everybody for the most part is just trying to focus on their civilization. But you have a problem. This other civilization is getting its hands on a vital resource. You need that resource. You need it. It's something that you want. It's something that you need. You need it. And as needing that resource, what do you do? What do you do? Now, you may not necessarily take overt action because overt action is going to cost time, resources, and everything else. But what do? You need to get your hands on it. Are you going to allow your country to starve or weaken because of it? If you have the might, if you have the muscular resources, do you come up with a reason to take it, or do you just leave it be? Like, this idea, I guess I understand what Pat Buchanan is saying. The problem with this is there are situations that come up where people want to get their hands on other resources. Now, I understand the United States is massively overstretched. I'm talking about in this kind of different world. Assume for the moment, different world. And I'm just making a point that the natural incentives of the way the system is arranged does push countries to go outside of itself. It's not that they do this shit willy-nilly. Yeah, sometimes it's geopolitical politics, but geopolitical politics to what end? You know, when those oil companies are opening up in Iraq after the Iraq War, did they do that to put those oil companies there? Who knows? Is somebody making a lot of money because of that war? Yes. Did it cost the United States trillions of dollars? Yes. We foot the bill for this kind of corporate expansionism. Now, what I'm getting at here is, under the natural incentives of the capitalistic system that Pat Buchanan prizes and loves, you're prodded to behave in particular ways. Empire prods itself along. Empire always look for new markets in order to sell its goods and sell its whatever. And it just so happens that the Middle East has a lot of oil. It has a lot of a particular resource. And that's in the best of cases. What happened in the worst of cases, in our case, where, yeah, we need to go over there for something and now we're over there continuously. And even if you say it's not because of capitalistic expansion, but these are noble people trying to fight terrorism and trying to do the best thing that they can, I think that's nonsense. I think that's nonsense. Is it incompetence? Is it incompetence? And is incompetence somewhat of a utopian definition for what's taking place? Who the fuck knows? I don't know. But I do know, I agree with what Pat Buchanan was saying there. Leave people to their devices. We don't need to get involved. At least not to the degree that we've been getting involved. Protect our vital interests and say fuck all to the rest. And look, you could even make a case that going outside of yourself, once you protect your vital interests, may not even be necessary. Here's another case. What happens when there's a rival civilization and that rival civilization gets to the point of being close to what you are? Now, I'll give you a perfect example. Britain's strategy in world domination, Britain had like 20% of the globe. They were able to do that based on their naval strength. They had this amazing navy and their technology exceeded others. So their plan was, our strategy for continued domination of the world is to have a navy that's twice as big as the next country. We need to be able to fight 2 wars in different regions of the world. It was a strategy that they wanted to use in order to deal with their threats. Well, what happens when Germany and America become rival powers? And this idea of having 2 times as much becomes impossible. You're running a gigantic empire, and now you've just had a world war. You've gutted your resources. What do? Like, it's not that simple. I understand what Pat Buchanan is saying, but when you're sitting at the helm of it, you're saying to yourself, that guy's a threat. What do you do when you perceive somebody else as a threat and you perceive that this other person may be hostile, this other person may be dominant? What if that person decides that they want to use their economic might if we allow them to get ahead economically? What do? It's not that simple. I understand what Pat Buchanan is saying, and we've got way off the rails in regards to how we interact with the world. So from the standpoint of the way the world is, I agree with him entirely. I agree with him completely. You start getting interested when you start getting into the details. It's like, what happens in this case? What about this case? What about this case? Because it becomes not so clear cut as hands off. What does hands off means when hands off may be worse for your country? What does that mean? Great clip back, Pat Buchanan. Great clip. Anthony Allen. Anthony, leave a comment, please. I love it when people leave comments and when you do super chat, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Wesley Walker, oh, Jesus Christ. Damn good shows today, man. Happy Friday. Wesley Walker, happy Friday, and thank you very much. Thank you very much. You are far too kind. You're far too kind. Jamal is looking to expand his Republican viewership. I'm talking about Pat Buchanan. Nobody remembers Pat Buchanan, dude. Nobody remembers Pat Buchanan. And explain to me everything Pat Buchanan said right there. He's right. He's right. We need to cut this militarism shit up. He's right. Hello, Jared. Wesley Walker makes me feel bad for myself about being cheap. That's funny. That's funny. Edward Klein, Jews Control Comedy. I love Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. I love Larry David. I love Larry David. What is this? You said Control? Control comedy? That's hilarious. Control comedy. Control is strong, but love Seinfeld. Love Larry David. Larry David was one of my favorite shows. Hands down, one of my favorite shows. He used to trip me the fuck out. Self-deprecating humor done in this awesome way. This thing of it's just an awesome show. Just an awesome show. Pat Buchanan hands gestures are funnier than Trump's. Joe Terrizzo, he was Trump before Trump. Pat Buchanan was to the right. Pat Buchanan to the right. You know that Larry David and Bernie Sanders are cousins, right? They are not. Marsha Smith, I think Marsha, I think you're fibbing to me. Maybe. I don't know. Yes, Jamal, why don't you address some of the anti-Semitism? In what? Larry David's? What anti-Semitism? What are you talking about? The Jews stepped in because they couldn't own property. Nice swerve to keep your alt-right viewers. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. Pat Buchanan challenged Papa Bush. I would give him praise for that. Yeah. Oh, Anna, you realize I can't see everything in the chat. Like, I'm seeing stuff as it comes up. I don't know what people are saying. Pat Buchanan plays the religious card better than Trump. Yes. Yes. He was more authentic. I mean, how can you be... Yeah, he was all more authentic. I mean, Donald Trump... There's no way Donald Trump would play the religious card. Anti-Semitism in this chat. Nikki M. I didn't realize there was anti-Semitism in the chat. Let's see. I see Assad. Yeah, I can't see everything that goes on in chat, guys. I would say this. I may be against Israel, at the very least the government of Israel. I thought the country was fucking beautiful. But I make a distinction between the policies of the government versus what the people themselves are doing. Total with BDS, all that good stuff. I don't like this thing of castigating all with what some are doing, if that makes sense. Like, I don't have this thing in my head of I think in my head people are just people. I think people get put into certain situations and those people respond in particular ways. This thing of being an anti-Semite, let's not. And yes, I can't see everything that takes place in my chat. So if I don't flag something, it's because I don't necessarily see something. But yeah, that being said, I don't support that. Come on. Perseus Gold. Exactly, don't hold people accountable for their leaders' actions. Leaders are always corrupt. Look, and I say that from my own experiences. I've been to Israel. The people are fucking beautiful. And my own experiences. I met this woman. I was in a bookstore. I think it was in Nepal. No, not Nepal. Israel. Was it Israel? Wherever I was. I don't remember exactly where I was. But we were looking at something, and her and I started talking. There was an older woman. And as we're talking, I said, I'm on my way to Nepal. No, maybe it was Israel. It was Jerusalem. And I was like, yeah, I'm on my way to Nepal. And she's like, no, you can't do that. I've had a cousin that went to Nepal, and he came back really ill. And I don't want you to go there and get yourself ill and get yourself sick. That would be a bad idea for you to do. And the woman's daughter comes and says, Mom, you don't have to push this kid or push this guy not to go to the places. And she was like, well, no, I'm just concerned because I don't want him to be ill, etc., etc. And I've heard people make this point of like a Jewish mother and stuff like this. That woman didn't know me from anybody. And yet the woman cared about my own self-interest like nobody's business. Look, people are people. I strongly believe that. There are certain elements of the government that push people in particular ways. And there's certain ways society is organized that ends up putting people in these horrendous conditions. If you go into certain parts of Palestine, yeah, you will find people who hate Jews and want to cut the head off of a Jew. At the same time, you find the same thing in Israel. You have this thing where these people have arranged themselves in this awkward, obtuse way. How do you unravel that? I don't know how you unravel that. And if you lived in those places, what would you think if you lived in those places? Like, if you lived in Israel, what would you think? I'm trying to get across to this thing of you have this benefit of not necessarily being in those shitty situations. And so you don't necessarily, looking on it and having this kind of disposition about it. No, I'm not necessarily going to castigate the whole by the actions of some. I'm not going to do it. They do it to blacks. I don't particularly like it when they do it to blacks. They do it. I don't like it. So I don't have that thing in me. My feeling is, you can make an argument that goes with this idea of the economic unfairness in the country and deal with this thing of identity and protecting identity. The problem becomes, and this is always the problem from the SJW standpoint, is what's that line? Like, what's the point where it's like, all right, this is anti-Semitic or this is somewhat racist versus this is somebody's feelings just being hurt by something somebody said. That line is always debatable. I don't necessarily like to get into these. I don't like those games. Like, I don't like the line stuff. There's sometimes where people would be like, you should have said something about that. And it's like, somebody gave an opinion. I don't necessarily agree with each opinion. There are other times where it's like, yeah, you're insane. That wasn't racist or prejudiced or sexist at all. This is you and your shit. Question becomes, what's the line? But no, I don't do this castigation stuff. Stereotypes are assumptions. Both are not needed. Joe Turizo, Pat Hacker, our elections aren't rigged. For instance, you can run for president and not be put in jail by the current president like Putin did. Now that's rigging. That's beyond rigging. That shit is beyond rigging. Joe, what I would say is, certainly that's not the scale. Like, certainly the scale can't just be you can run versus put in prison. You can run, but shouldn't it be a fair election? I mean, shouldn't, you have, if you put this patina that of fairness on it, shouldn't it be an actual fair election? I mean, is that not fair to ask? I mean, no, it's not Vladimir Putin locking up your opponent. It is fucking over the voters in the process, not allowing them to have a fair process. I think that's a drastic display between the two things. And I think there's a middle ground between those two things. Hey, how about let's not cheat people? Or say that we're cheating people. Say that cheating is part of the process. That way you don't necessarily have to, get called on, oh my God, you guys are cheating, what the fuck? Yeah, say cheating is part of the process. You can't have it both ways. It's like torture. Like I gave you a perfect example. If you're going to have torture in your society, make it legal. Let them have that debate, have that conversation about whether or not we should mutilate and break and rip apart other human beings. Let each senator get up there and say it, that that's what we want to do. Take that shit out the shadows. Put that shit on display and make it into law. Don't do the stuff behind the scenes. Own it. Anna, Muslims vote far left on economic issues. What the hell data did you find to suggest that? Oh, you're not talking to me, you're talking to somebody else. Muslim votes far left on. What? Do they? That's hilarious. Joe Teresa, Jamal, do you support government funding the elections? Yes, I do. Because we have that, but corporate donors and PACs make it obsolete. Unionize progressive commentators. I would love to unionize progressive commentators. I mean, I've done videos on that. Nobody seems receptive. The video is going off the rails. The video has gone off the rails. ISIS is socialist. They're just theocratic, crazy socialists. I don't know about that one. Enough with the Russia bullshit. Nathan Stevenson agreed. Allison Mack, sex cult leader, is Jewish. Harvey Weinstein, Jewish. Piece again. Skip, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? I don't understand. I mean, I can name serial killers who are white. I can name, dictators who are black. George Bush killed 1 million people. He's white. He's Christian. I mean, what are you saying? Hitler was a Christian. He killed 1 million people. You can even make a case that some of the stuff was this kind of weird, Christian dogma. So what? Saber Jeans Progressive. We should be able to address the problems with Israel policy, their right-wing government, and also address the policies of culture of the Arab world. Yes. That's just honest. Like, what I mean is, I remember I was in Nepal, and I had a conversation with 2 Israeli soldiers, and mind you, we bumped heads about Israeli policy. And it wasn't harsh. It was more so like I wasn't politically aware. And I just told him, dude, I've been traveling through Muslim countries for the past month. And I've seen some of the shit that you guys do with regards to the Arabs in the area. That looks bad. Just as somebody who's looking from the outside, looking in, that looks bad. That looks horrendous. And he tries to explain to me that this is the reason why we do it. This is, et cetera, et cetera. And we go to the next thing. This looks bad. He tries to explain why he does it, etc. His friend was over there. I don't think his friend liked me very much because I was bringing this up. And I didn't bring it up. He brought it up to me. That's the first point. I didn't bring this shit up. He brought it up. He wanted to talk about it. We had a 3-hour ride to go to bungee jumping. He brought it up. And it's like at the end of the conversation, he said, look, I can understand why people dislike us. He said, I get it. He says, I've lived in Arab areas. We used to have the gates to prevent people from throwing stuff on us. I understand why people dislike us. What we do looks really bad around the globe. That's honest. That's fucking honest. I can deal with that. That's a conversation that we can have. Nobody threw blows. Nobody got angry. Just a conversation. Also, I was extremely ill at this point. Like, not extremely ill, but I was too ill to be climbing up a mountain. And I didn't realize that after the bungee jump, you had to climb back up the mountain. Guess who were the first 2 people to come back to me? Those 2 Israeli soldiers. It's not the people, man. Like, I know it looks bad. I know it looks extremely bad from the standpoint of people outside, and you would hear stuff that some Israelis are saying, or things that they're doing, or things the government are doing. People, like, in groups, are kind of like people. I mean, they're just avatars. They're the larger group is like a smaller part. There's always just like every aspect of the larger group gets off some way of expressing something that's just a human thing. And same with the people who are abused exhibit certain bad traits. And people are in a certain society, and they kind of grow up in a society. They have self-interest just like anybody else. The coal miners in West Virginia, yes, the product that they produce causes bad things around the globe from an environmental standpoint. Does that mean that the coal miner is going to give up his job? Fuck no. Doesn't matter. I have a family, I have a wife, I have a kid to feed. I'm going to make sure those ends are safe. Doesn't matter that that thing is adversely affecting everybody else. Is that guy a horrible person? No, he's a person. No more, no less. What does a person look like if they're in Israel right now? Just a regular, average person. We're looking from here and looking at there. Same thing with Palestine. Same thing with the Muslim countries that are at war, like ISIS and everything else. We're from here looking there. What does it look like when you've grown up in a particular society, in a particular culture, you have certain ideas of the world, all these things, all of these things that are put into you, and you come up with a certain disposition. And most people don't wake up to realize that the disposition that they have was a disposition that was stuffed into them. It's not fully their fault. That's what I'm saying. The idea of agency and free will and everything else is overblown. I can't be angry at the individuals, even though I do get pissed at the individuals. If that makes sense. There are two thoughts. There's both thoughts at the same time. In one standpoint, it's this kind of thing of history kind of has a tide that goes along in a particular way. And you're born in a particular tide of history. Those people behave in particular ways. You have governments that take people down certain paths. You have media that colludes with government to give people a certain disposition. All these things. Culture, society. The idea of American exceptionalism massacred an entire genocide. And we look at it as the birth and founding of a nation. When you look at the Russian Revolution, they say, look at those savages. Look at those savages. We massacred an entire population of people. And that is a glorious testament. Yeah, reality is weird. That's all. Yeah. Let me say it this way. If I was abroad and somebody took out what the United States government does on me, I'd feel some kind of way about it. Clearly, I would feel some kind of way about it because the shit is happening to me. By the same token, do I understand that we've done things that adversely affect their people, and that trying to strike out and trying to strike back at the thing that's doing it, they're being not all that selective in doing so, in the same way that we kill civilians in mass constantly. It's, yes, if I was distant, not in the pain and everything else, yeah, I would understand it. In the moment, would I understand it from the perspective of the individual? No, I would not. They're two different perspectives, but both are true. It's the way I look at the world. I look at the world from the standpoint of how much agency does the individual have when they're born in a particular society, and they're cultured, raised, the difficulties, the foibles, the problems, the things that don't quite work right, the inequalities, seeing certain things that they have abroad that they don't necessarily have there, and wondering why the disparities between those things, all those things. If do you honestly believe that people would rather join ISIS as opposed to have a decent job? Do you honestly believe that? Do you think they're just bloodthirsty savages to such a degree that if they had something else that they could be doing as opposed to running around in the desert with guns and getting shot, that they would do that something else? We have this, we have a cartoonish vision of what it's like to be somewhat of a fighter in this case. It's not. These are human beings. They're people. They're born in a particular way. Yeah. It's off the rails, but it's the same. Oh, there's more. Cool Blue 71. Jamal, I really enjoyed your video, Anita Turner. Thank you. By the way, I'm in Michigan. If Democrats nominated corporatist gubernatorial nominee. I did not Democrats my general election vote. It would be necessary. Clue Blue 71. I agree with you. I did the same thing here. It feels weird. I honestly want to stop wars, reinstate the draft. That's fucking interesting, Rob. That's so interesting. Let's talk about that for a moment. Well said. You're being perfectly cordial despite. Lord 3. Thank you. I try to be. I mean, I don't like to be obtuse on my show. Man, it is my show. I don't want to look like an asshole. Reinstate the draft. I had a conversation with this guy that I was starting to get really cross with as we were having a conversation. I was not in my political awareness, but there's still something in me that wants. I like freedom. I don't like this thing of being enraptured. And he was saying that everybody should be held for military draft. Everybody should be in the military. And I'm like, you've lost your mind. You're insane. You're trying to make the choice for somebody else that forces them to be in the military? Fuck that. Now, but for the draft, if we have a war, we're dragging ass of all these different types of people into the military. That's fucking interesting. Right now, we have 1% of the country that in the military, 1 or 2% that's in the military. That 1 or 2% allows for the president to have his own, essentially, hit squad. The president, for the most part, has a certain degree of latitude all across the world with his own hit squad. You have renditions, you have people who would do bad things, like SEAL teams and everything else. But he exerts political influence that doesn't adversely affect the rest of the population itself. So the population is less inclined to care about the chaos that's caused around the world because it doesn't adversely affect us. Think about that. The president has his own army. Not the army of America, but the president has his own army. If you reinstate the draft, would that make people care? I think, in fact, I'm pretty certain, the Vietnam War, all of those people who were freaking out the Vietnam War, wasn't because they had this moral level of integrity, this massive amount of moral integrity, and they're out there and they're like, yes, we need to stop these wars. No, they didn't like the draft. They were being drafted. It's not so much they gave a shit about what was taking place over there. Their asses were on the line for this stuff. They were pissed off. You're sending me over to fucking kill somebody. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be involved in that. I'm angry about this. I'm pissed off about this. You're sending me over to get shot. Fuck that. Fuck that. Again, action consequence. The people themselves didn't necessarily care all that much about what was going on over there. They started to care from the standpoint of looking for arguments to be against the draft. But I would make the point, and maybe this is cynical, this had less to do about the Vietnamese and more to do about them being drafted. If you reinstitute the draft, would it make people care? Would it make more people care? That's a good question, Rob. That is a damn good question. I mean, you could say it made more people care in Vietnam. Will you die for this dumbass president? And that becomes the question. And I think most people will say, fuck that. Fuck that. I'm not going to die for some reality show hosts. Pat Hacker, Rob Illinois, I never want to see anyone ever drafted again in my life. Pat Hacker, but engage his point. I mean, he has a good point. How do you stop wars if not getting the rest of the public involved? And how do you stop wars if it doesn't hurt the rest of the public? It needs to bite. It needs to dig into your fucking skin. Like, look, we coat these wars in this elegance. Like, this is the president. This is the moment that the president is being presidential, bombing and killing people abroad. This is fucking nonsense. This is maniacs. Like, this is a violent culture that thinks that this is okay. They're doing bombings, and the world eats his Cheerios, plays his Xbox, and going about his way. And it's like, but they're murdering people. And this doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. And I never understand why this is not a big deal. I was in those countries. They're just human beings. They're just human beings. Kids that play video games. Kids that watch porn. Being in Egypt. And this thing on the beach. And near the Red Sea, a swan. No, not a swan. A swan. Nah, I don't remember. But whatever. It's on Dahab. It's Dahab. And you're on this beach. You're in this coffee shop. Because there are coffee shops all over the place. Most people can't necessarily afford computers. And you walk by and this kid is watching porn. And you're like you realize that whatever the religious overlay is, there's this aspect of a person that's still there. The religion is just an overlay. It's awesome. I mean, yeah, it's weird, strange, but how do you make it hurt? And how do you make it dig into the person if you don't have something to actually make it hurt and dig into the person and make them want to stop it? That's the point. It would be nice to have a progressive video platform with verified identities. We could literally start an independent primary process online. It would promote itself, let anyone run issues, debate. That is interesting. That's interesting. The next turn, Jamal, email Cal, Jordan, Jimmy, etc. Start their unit here. I have no way to get in contact with Cal or Jimmy. Jordan, yes, but the other two, I don't have any way to get in contact with them. Jimmy Dore has never accepted my phone or my emails. As for Cal, I don't think I've ever tried. Darren, Scorpion 32, the draft would literally expose these liberal hypocrites. I once debated a Hillary supporter who protested to Vietnam but is a warmonger now. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Nuri Hakim, the CFR controls the media. These special clubs or think tanks are steering with too much control. Mr. Miles, Jamal Thomas, if they have a draft in today's age, they'll just send poor people and call it a jobs program. They do that now. That's what it's called now. They do that right now. Who do you think joins a volunteer military? Do tell. Who do you think? Who do you think goes and joins? Who do you think that 1 or 2% is? Do you think that's the upper crust? Do you think that's these kind of limousine liberals? Who do you think is in the military? It's the people who look at it as a job. This is my jobs program. I don't have a bunch of cash. I'm going to do this because I'm going to see the world. I'm going to do this because I want to provide for my family. I want to do this. Some because I want to support my country. But whatever the reason, many of the people who are joining that, they're doing it for jobs. That's what it is now. You're acting like it would be something fundamentally different if you made it a draft. And don't misunderstand me. This is not me arguing for the draft. I know it sounds like I'm arguing for the draft. I'm not. But you can't ignore the point. Rob's point is persistent. Look, it's if you're telling me you guys want less war, fair enough. Fuck it. We want less war. That's what we want to do. How do you do it? If we're in a room, all of us in a room, and we're having this debate, pretend for the moment that we're not just the outward malcontents on the edge of the political spectrum, like in a fucking galaxy or on a far planet. But pretend for the moment that we had clout. Pretend for the moment that we had some kind of political thing where we could kind of push the apparatus in a particular way. And we were debating on how do we get less war? How do we get less war? We don't have political power entirely, but with the political clout that we do have, how do we get less war? If you're looking for something to say, well, people don't care about killing other people, that's a cynical approach, but that approach is true. And if you stay with, well, look, because people don't care about killing other people, then trying to use a moral argument for less war is not fully going to get you to where you want to go. Meaning other arguments that people take will override those moral arguments. Arguments about the economy, fear-mongering, those things may override those arguments. Even arguments about you're going to lose your jobs if you do what that guy says. Because so much of our jobs now are military. How do you do it? How do you do it? How do you do it? If you were looking for a by hook or by crook way, the draft is a fascinating idea. Like the draft takes the cynical approach from the standpoint of us. Look, people don't care about other people per se, especially if their needs are in question in any particular way. If their needs are going to be up for any type of questioning at all, those people are not going to give two shits about the other people. They're going to live their life, they're going to do their jobs, and they're going to come back home and they're going to say, it's not my fault. The system is killing those people abroad. It's not my fault. I voted for this person went in office, etc., etc. Stuff happens. I got a job. The world is good. Meaning they're not going to see the misery that's being caused by other people. So how do you make it hurt? Equal parties. Meaning if you're going to have these wars, how do you make it hurt? The draft will do it. Those people who don't give two shits about other people being killed will give two shits about if they were the ones who were doing it. And guess what? They would bitch and they would moan and they would complain. And political leaders would be far less likely to have that level of chaos directed in their direction if they're going to come out and say, we're going to go to war with this person. And for a second point, I'd add this and say, and by the way, all of these campaigns are wars. All of them are wars. Each and every last one of them are wars by law. If we're doing some kind of militaristic exercises, that's a war. Meaning, the draft needs to be reinstated for each and one of these engagements. Be cynical. You should be cynical. I mean, people like to think, in these glorious terms. I play my percentage with incentives. What way does incentives push for the people to behave? There will be some people who will push back on those incentives, moral grounds or things that are into them. But the majority of people are gonna scoot along. Yeah, it's not that I want to see people ripped away into the military. That's the opposite. But in an odd way, is it possible to reinstituting the draft and the political ire that's associated with something like that? Anytime somebody declares a war and those people are getting dragged off to war, would that create a drag on any president that wants to create a war, as opposed to now where that war doesn't affect the rest of the country? Rob, you're pulling me over, man. You're pulling me over. You're pulling me to the side. I'm shocked. I can't believe I'm saying this, but you're winning me over. Sir Bikes a lot today. Oh, thank you, Sir Bikes a lot. Bad Mama Jamma. Love the show. Love the show. Big Dog. Never stop calling out the bullshit. In the Wisconsin governor's race, crowd-funded Democrat shun progressive Mike McCabe could use some indie media exposure. A guest on the soapbox, perhaps. Of course. If that guy wants to come on, he's absolutely welcome. What is his name? Mike McCabe. Mike McCabe. I'll hit him up. And this is Wisconsin. Oh, Scott Walker. Is Scott Walker running this year? I don't know if he's running this year. Anyone pushing for the draft has no clue. Jamal John. I'm always laughing at the name. I'm not pushing for the draft. I am making the point that how do you stop war? Like, honestly, how do you stop? Like, you have to engage that. You're saying anybody pushing for the draft that's not an argument. That's nothing. That's nothing at all. To be Enriquez, and much as in perspective, moderate rebels, terrorists, all the same. Yeah, they are terrorists. Now terrorists, that's all they are. The moderate rebels thing is a political stunt. It's used for obfuscation for what the United States is absolutely doing. Let's call it what it is. It's not perspective. It's not perspective at all. The United States is taking that position purely for political reasons because it wants to essentially give them money, give them resources. The press is stupid enough to go along with it. Moderate my ass. Moderate my ass. That's not perspective. Sorry to be that's not perspective. That's not perspective. Or at least I disagree that that's perspective. Wars will continue to happen with or without drafts. Do you know, during the Vietnam War, they thought the country was coming apart at the seams. Like, it had gotten that bad. Richard Nixon, pulling buses around the White House to try to prevent people from going there. People were pissed off. Yes, there were a lot of reasons, but part of the reasons were those people were being drafted, and they were politically engaged, and they were pissed off. Now, the question becomes, will wars continue with drafts? Maybe. Will there be a political consequence for those wars? Yes. Yes. There will be a political consequence for those wars, yes. If you had a draft, come on, please tell me that I'm right on this. And I know that sounds funny, but please tell me I'm right. Vietnam was fucking chaos. That war was utter chaos. What was taking place during the 60s was utter chaos. Do you realize you had people pushing pipe bombs in the different areas of the country? Those bombs going off, they were using that as protest for what was taking place from the standpoint, making the point that this is morally right because what the United States is doing is horrendous. Like, I mean, come on, let's be honest. If you're trying to get the population engaged, getting them engaged by putting a knife in their hands or putting a kick in the ass from the standpoint of you're going to go die for your country, congratulations. Too bad you weren't politically engaged. You would have prevented this shit in the first place. I don't know. if this fully stops wars, but it will add a political consequence to what's taking place. I would suspect that the reason why you don't particularly like this draft is because you like, for the same reason I don't like the draft. I'm making an argument for something I don't like. I feel some kind of way about it. It feels off. It feels weird. Like, it feels like any random person can be drafted, and that sucks, as opposed to people who decide that they want to go. I think that's what you're feeling. That's your reflex. That's my reflex also. Like, I'm arguing for something I don't fully believe in. But when I'm challenging this thing of why don't I believe in it, or why don't I think it's a good idea, I'm stuck with this reality that what Rob is saying is true. That this thing of, if you make it hurt for the rest of the population, you would get the more population galvanized against what's taking place that's making it hurt. Meaning that war. Would the president just use like SEAL Team 6 and stuff like that and drones? Yes, probably. Will other campaigns require the draft? Maybe. In fact, what I strongly suspect will take place is that people will try to find any way around using those people. They will try to find any legal trick, any legal framework, anything. Like, shit. That would avoid getting into that particular thing of having to actually draft people. That's what I suspect. I mean, like now, the United States is in, like 7 countries? There's no justification from that from a legalistic standpoint. We just do it. I suspect it would be the same thing with the draft. So, it wasn't just the draft. There were recruiters applying pressure to anyone who could, and 2 and 2 and get 4 in every high school. Yeah, Bob. Yeah, that too. But we spend $1 trillion on our military. Everybody likes to rah-rah the troops. Is it fair that only 2% of the country participates in the military? If the military, and us killing all of these people and everything else is such a good thing, should those patriots go die for their country? And if those patriots had to go die for their country, would they be so willing to support these wars? I'm just saying, what Rob is saying can't be dismissed. That's all. Fuck, go ahead, institute the draft again. I don't have kids. They're not the ones that will die. Pat, this is not it is an argument for the draft, but it's not an argument that I fully believe in. I'm making the argument, though, because I kind of don't believe in it. I kind of want to hear the argument. I can make an argument for some of anything. And the argument that I think Rob is making here shouldn't just be dismissed. How do you stop war? Like, I'm asking this question in an honest way. And I'm saying that what Rob is saying is an imperfect solution to a persistent question that we have. How do you stop it? Make it hurt for everybody. That's his point. Would it be easier to try to take the money out of war? Would it be easier to say, instead of instituting a draft, look, for the munitions and everything else for war, we're confiscating those. Meaning, you have to give us those either at cost, but you're not going to make a profit off of us going to war. And put it in the law. Make it not a profit for corporations and everything else for when the United States go to war. Meaning, create disincentives in the way that we go about our affairs. I think that would be easier than instituting a draft, if I'm being honest. Easier, I don't know if it's easier. Let me say it that way. But are there other ways of doing this without like jury rigging the system? I feel like a draft is a jury rig. Like it's trying to say people are cynical and the only way is to make it hurt for everybody. I would prefer to do something that goes to the heart of the problem, or at the very least tries to stop the incentives into the system that are causing these things to prosper and propagate themselves. Make it unprofitable. Make it unprofitable. Yeah. What will help prevent war is proper journalism. Mr. Miles, that too. But how do you get that, Mr. Miles? I mean, think about what these guys do from the standpoint of journalism, where they give this American exceptionalism thing. Do you know what one of those journalists asked, one of those hacks, asked Jill Stein? They said, look, why did you go to the Russia thing? And shouldn't you try to take a perspective that's more in line with America? Because Jill Stein was making this point that, look, from the standpoint of the world, What you're talking about, the Russia stuff, is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. We go into other countries left and right. We just went into a country with 1 million people. What are you talking about? Hillary Clinton had $1 billion to spend, and she had her own trolls and all this other stuff. Are you giving me shit about going to this thing, this party? No, I'm not taking the shit from you. I'm not going to take a lesson from you. And he asked her, in the most mundane way, hey, shouldn't your perspective be more in line with America? I mean, after all, you're running for office. I understand what you're telling me is true, but I mean, come on. And you think about, this is the way they give their perspective to America. We understand that there are other things that take place. We understand that there's a larger context. But that is not the way we talk about it. We talk about these things purely from a very particular disposition, even though we know that there's a wider context and more information that we could give the audience. Because people are pariahs. And they start wars. They help those wars persist. There's no war that will persist itself if the media turn against that war, saying, oh my God, look at these people are being killed. We're murdering people left and right. Oh my God. And every day what they did was come out with their hair on fire, screaming about how bad this war is. There is no war that will prosper. None. But that's not what they do. They say that Donald Trump never looked more presidential as he was illegally bombing the country. It's amazing. Fucking amazing. Zombie in the air. I caught a live one. Yes, you did, Zombie in the air. You did catch a live one. Scarcity is the main driver of war. The real legend. But there is no such thing as scarcity. The scarcity is manufactured. It's not real. It's not real. It's, people make these arguments that if they would require 9 Earths for people to live in the way that they live now, the question becomes, why do they need to live this way now? Your lawnmower, for example. Why do you need to own a lawnmower? Have you ever thought of that? 99.9% of the time your lawnmower sits in the thing. Nobody's using it. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there. Just empty space along with a bunch of other stuff that never gets used. Why do you need to own it? Like, we need a paradigm shift in the way we go about our affairs and the way we look at the way we live our lives. Most of the stuff that we're buying is just junk. You're propagandized to in order to get stuff and buy stuff. It's nonsense. It's like, you don't need 9 Earths. You just need to live differently. That's all. And it's not even this thing where we're in scarcity. The scarcity is forced. How often, how long does it take to manufacture the tools and the metals that go into a computer? And within 2 years, you toss that shit into a landfill. Don't think twice about it. You're throwing away resources, throwing away supplies. The goal is we're trying to maximize our profit. And if we made a computer that will last for 10 years, which we probably could do, we'd go out of business. Everything is built on this capitalistic model, but scarcity in the system doesn't exist. The scarcity is somewhat contrived. You have enough for everybody. You have enough for everybody. Stuff like a Cooper Mini, yes, Bob. Stuff like a Cooper Mini. I have a Mini Cooper. Bob is fucking with me. I have a Mini Cooper. And speaking of Mini Cooper, look, I'm a product of my environment too, man. There's certain things that I love. There's certain things that set off a thing in my head. When I had the opportunity to get a Prius or a Mini Cooper, fuck it, I chose the Mini Cooper. It's what it is. Slightly ashamed, but it's alright. Planned obsolescence. Yeah, Soviet winter prison. Yes, it's planned obsolescence. I think the rich belong in jail, making nutty buddy, salty balls, zogzavaks. You want to condemn the rich to a horrible, horrible demise, making nutty butters. Let's see. Should we use leaves instead of toilets? No, I don't think that. I don't think it. I don't want it to be ridiculous. But come on, are you telling me that there is no between how we live our lives? And we know how we live our lives is destroying this planet and destroying us. Let's say destroying us or our habitable space. We know it. Scientists tell us about it all the time, even from the standpoint of climate change. Clearly, there needs to be a change. And we need to acknowledge that the capitalistic system itself kind of propels these negative attributes. these things that are great for maximizing somebody's profit, but sucks for the environmental calamity that it leaves in his wake. Certainly, there's an area where we can have this kind of sustainable world. And no, I don't mean people using leaves to go to the bathroom. I don't mean getting to that point. I'm not going to say that's ridiculous, because I would imagine there are people who are using leaves in somewhere. And I think I know people, when they were traveling, they were doing these treks, like in Nepal or something like that, in Kathmandu. And yeah, they didn't necessarily have everything that they needed. They were using whatever they could. It was like they were taking dumps in the forest and all. I was like, oh, that's so gross. when I was in Egypt, I was on this boat. And the boat was amazing. It was a boat on the Nile. It was a trip on the Nile. I was by myself. And this Hispanic family from Buenos Aires, Buenos Aires. They were, yeah, you can say Hispanic, from Buenos Aires. Nice as can be. And because I was traveling by myself, they took me in. It's the weirdest thing. I barely speak like very small Spanish, un poco. And I was able to communicate with them. Maybe I could hear every third word. One of their sons, Hector was fucking awesome. Hector spoke like 4 or 5 different languages. He spoke like Hebrew, a little bit of Arabic, Spanish, and English, of course. And he would translate between me and his family. And so we would go down to like the nightclub and stuff like that. We would hang up. There were 2 boats. One boat was that boat, where it was this really decent boat that everybody had rooms, everybody had bathrooms, and everything else. And the other boats were these not so decent boats, feluccas, for people who wanted to get this more visceral experience of what it was like 2,000 years ago. Just a man in his boat, sailing through the rivers of the Nile. And I was like, yeah, where do you go to bathroom? And he says, yeah, we pull the boat over and you can go from there. I was like, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I want to explore these places, but I want to explore these places in a certain degree of comfort. Shitting in the forest is not one of those things I need to experience. I don't need to do that. So I took the other boat. The other boat was much better. Yeah, no leaves, man. I want a real toilet. I want a real toilet. Want a real toilet. In France, you're lucky if the toilet flushes. No, it's not that bad. I've been to France. Mullen leaves are the best. They're like lamb leaves. Basil Peterson. Oh, dude, that's way too much. That's way too much information. Because if you're using leaves, where are you using those leaves? Are you just... Can you imagine that? That's so disgusting. You're walking through the forest, and you're like, man, look at the size. That's a big fucking bear. It's like, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Jamal, you can never know a place by visiting. No, Garden, that's true. I agree. Hands down, agree. You can only get a perspective. I agree. All right. Skip Rock. You're not supposed to flush the toilet in France. They use the toilet as cologne. Oh, that's hilarious. That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, that's hilarious. Alright, I'm going to end this. This has gone on for God knows. Oh, holy shit. This has gone on for 1 hour and 30 minutes. I try to hang out with my audience. So I try to, do these videos sometimes where I just kind of fuck around with my audience. We just kind of have fun. If anybody is new to my channel and you're looking like, what the fuck just happened? This is kind of like the after show. You'll see my shows, and oftentimes I would have the first 15, 20 minutes to give my own spiel. On shows where I don't necessarily, allow audience and everything else, those shows tend to be shorter. On shows where I interact with my audience, they can go longer, and we can talk about damn near anything. There was one video where we were talking about cannibalism and whether or not cannibalism was the right thing. whether cannibals were misunderstood and whether it was wrong. It can go anywhere. So I like that free flow of conversation. I like it. And so I like interacting with my audience on this stuff. Guys, all of you that helped with Super Chat, that helped the show. Anthony Allen, Wesley Walker, God, man, you're far too kind. Anthony Allen again, Cool Blue 71, Rob Illinois, Lord 3, I love it, Lord 3, Pet Hacker, wow, Sir Mike Salat a day, and Bad Mama Jam. Guys, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. You really do help the show. I mean, it's the little engine that could. I started from like zero. I think my mama was the first person to show up on the show. And my wife, like every other day, I'd be like, holy shit, I got a new subscriber. And it's like you hit 100. You're like, yes, I made it. I got 100 subscribers. Yes. I'm on the way to 100,000. Yeah, it's one of those things. And at some point, you stop telling your wife, like, the number every day. It's like, hey, I got another one. And you focus, a little bit more on the content and everything else. But it's weird, starting with nothing. And that feeling of why are you doing this? like, I know this sounds weird. But there's this odd thing of perspective. I did a video on it where your perspective is in some real way, your perspective dictates how you are. I know this sounds bizarre. The perspective isn't necessarily real per se, but it is your overlay on the world, and it does in some degree dictate how you are. And not just that, your perspective of everything. Like your perspective of who you are, your perspective of the world itself, your perspective of who you are in relation to that world. None of those things are solid. But all of those things infect and in some degree make you who you are. It's not just what I am, it's also what I dislike in opposed to what I like. When you do the show and you have this perspective of the world, at least I did, why are you doing this? It seems fucking ridiculous. like nobody's watching. You're essentially alone in the forest, shaking and rattling, on your channel. Why are you doing this? What the fuck? It just so happens there was enough angst and pissed offness that propelled me in those earlier moments. And then at a certain point, when people started to watch, it became, to some degree, almost like a responsibility, if that makes sense. It's hard getting from that point of this feels ridiculous because nobody's watching me to there are some people that are watching and you are pushing the debate, even if you're just pushing it a little. I appreciate it because that's what I'm saying. This is such an odd thing to do from the standpoint of a job, and I had to declare like a small business, fucking complicated taxes, but nevertheless, it's the odd thing to do, and it's an odd way in which you see yourself. It's easy to say I'm a software engineer. That's easy. What are you, software engineer? Said it with a certain amount of pride, considering all the medical stuff. It was fuckfest, even getting a degree, let alone getting into the work thing. And most people in my position don't necessarily work. And so I, software engineer, always said it with pride. And then it's like you started doing the other thing kind of as part-time. You started doing this a little bit more. And you're like, okay, what am I? And mind you, the answer is somewhat pointless. At the exact same token, the answer is fucking phenomenal and necessary. Like, what do you see of yourself? And what are you? Now, we, as human beings, get hung up on this. And to some degree, that's a factor of the way we organize ourselves, our society itself. That's not something that's purely internal self. But that is something that we take upon ourselves. And work and all this other stuff becomes one of those things that are so ingrained in us that we even ask people, what do you do? Almost as one of those natural things. As if what they do is somehow some kind of testament to the character of who they are. Not so much. Doctor can be a pedophile. The nurse can be, the best person on the planet. The guy on the street maybe have a heart of gold. Job. It's not a degree of character. Not a degree of character at all. And yet, it's there nonetheless. It becomes, what am I? What am I? How do I define myself in this? And all of this is somewhat of a transition, and all of it is strange, all of it is weird. But nevertheless, I enjoy it. I try not to get hung up on the what is it, if that makes sense. But I do it, and I like it. And I like the influence that it gives. I got to talk to Richard fucking Wolf. Like if Jack Fresco was still alive, I would be able to talk to Jack Fresco. And that by itself, it's fucking amazing. Yeah, it's a fucking amazing opportunity. So I thank you all very much. All of you who helped the show, whether you're, sharing, liking, tweeting, etc. Whether you're sending me stuff, hey, take a look at this. Hey, did you see what this guy just did? Did you see the shit that just took place? Hey, they just bombed this place. What do you think? All this stuff. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, guys. And I'm going to end this here. What time is it? It's 9:03. I don't think I'm going to do another one tonight. I don't think so. There's one that I really want to do with Noam Chomsky that I've been trying to do for the last 2 days. This one went magnificently long. Yeah, I don't know. I make no promises on that one. I may do it in the morning. Either way, you guys have a good night, and thank you very much.